Hi everybody, this is David Mark, aka Dawi Ben Eliyahu, here broadcasting live in downtown Jerusalem, the holy city, the eternal capital of the Jewish people of Israel. Today's hangout is our debut hangout. On Israel Rising, we've been focusing a lot on Africa, as you guys know. All sorts of different areas: Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, Ghana, and its relationship to Israel. We want to take this hangout and kind of take an overview on where this is all going. We understand that the highest levels of government here are pivoting very quickly towards first East Africa, and it seems to be also encouraging development in Ghana, Nigeria, and other areas of Sub-Saharan Africa. This comes for a few different reasons. The first one is ultimately practical. Sub-Saharan Africa is basically a buffer zone against radical Islamic terror. For ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iranian influence. For a long time now, we know that Kenya has been helping, Kenya and Ethiopia have been helping Israel on the ground there in terms of intelligence to destroy convoys meant for Gaza from the Sudan. We also know that that was part of the tit for tat in terms of Israel covertly in the beginning helping South Sudan gain independence, and then overtly supplying weapons to them in terms of really pushing back against the encroachment of radical Islam towards the south. What's important here is I don't want to just focus singly on the political and the geopolitical perspective. I want to focus also on the cultural, fraternal aspect of this relationship, and why it's very, very important that this is going forward. We're gonna have a few different guests on the hangout that are going to touch on the subject. One from a spiritual place, from a geopolitical sense, and ultimately why Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Israel really deserve and should be partnering together in terms of the changing landscape of the world, and what this will actually do for the world at large. I want to take a step back and understand the parallels between the exile of the Judean people, which is basically the Israeli people now, and that we've come out of exile, but the exile and the enslavement by the Judean people from Judah roughly 2,000 years ago by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is the precursor, we understand, to the European Christian culture. The colonization of Israel really is the initial first colonization of Africa, as we know it. Why am I saying that? Because we understand that Israel is on the tectonic plate of Africa. So Israel is really a northeastern extension of the African continent. And ultimately speaking, the Roman conquest is the first point where a Western civilization is using its power and influence to actually colonize and forcibly deport a Semitic African people, which is basically what the Judean people were and are from back then. This exile, this forced exile and forced colonization by the precursors or the ancestors of the now European continent continued, and that continued down into Africa itself with the slave trade and the colonization of the central part of the African continent. The parallels also continue on to the Arab conquest of Israel and the Arab conquest of East Africa, and the Muslim enslavement and colonization of these areas as well, and their contribution to the slave trade. So both these forces, kind of the parallels of these forces, continued on through really the 20th century. Now, post-World War II, what happened was Israel gained its independence. Many of the Judeans, many of us came back from exile. The exile obviously forced us into a different, we took on new members to our tribe. We took on new members to our nation wherever we were, and we came back the way we looked. but we still retained our tribal customs and our tribal understandings that was birthed here in Israel. And post 1948, we see a series of colonies in Africa gain their independence as well. We see Kenya in 1964. Ethiopia regained its independence. Actually, it was long an independent country until Italy conquered it in the 1930s. So what we're seeing is we see this parallel structure as we, the Jewish people, gained our independence from our colonial masters, the British, and so on and so forth. We see throughout Africa these independent countries come into being throughout the second half of the 20th century. Now, why is this important? Is because the parallels between all of us, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Israel, are one, historically striking, and two, we have, based upon that bond of being oppressed and working through that oppression to actually build just societies, is something that it binds us together. Now we can take a actual current news item where we just saw the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, come and essentially begin to build a serious partnership with Israel, military partnership, economic partnership, and they're very clear. And his foreign minister said that Israel has plenty of friends in Sub-Saharan Africa, throughout the continent, and they see themselves as bonded to us as part of our history. Africa has a tremendous amount of natural resources, and the people are yearning to build just societies across many of the countries there. And they really do look up to Israel in a sense that not looking up to us as we are elite, but saying, hey, listen, these people came out of exile. They came out of a colonial control. They built one of the most amazing places in the world. And we can do that as well. And many of the Sub-Saharan African business leaders and activists I've been in touch with and spoken to over the last year and a half are very clear that they also see themselves religiously as connected to the Jewish people and connected to the Bible. And this is through Christianity. Now we have a tremendous amount of, very subtly, an awakening of Jewishness in places like Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria with the Igbo, and Cameroon, Zimbabwe, and the list goes on and on. These are growing Jewish communities that have their own flavors, and some of them are former lost Israelites. Touching briefly about the Igbo themselves are very clearly connected to Israel. They have a very their own oral history. Believe that they're from the tribe of Gad. They have a place called Abu Gad, which is I suppose at the palace, the seat of God. Gad. And they have a tremendous amount of parallel customs to ours. I can see that for another episode. And unfortunately for them, they're primarily located in an area of Nigeria called Biafra, which is attached. In 1914, the British did like they did everywhere else. They took 3 or 4 different nations and they merged them into a colony. Nigeria never really existed. It took the Hausa in the north, the Yoruba, Lagos, which is Lagos colony, and Biafra, which is where the Igbo are, and they merged them all together. And right now we have this volatile situation where the Muslims of the north of the Hausa are really beginning to massacre and harm the Igbo, which are traditional Israelites. Many of them have reverted back towards their pre-colonial religion, which is a form of Judaism. Many have actually fully converted or reattached themselves to rabbinic Judaism. So that's just one example of one. It's a volatile area. It's a volatile area in Africa, which is deserving of our focus, and sees themselves as connected to the Jewish people in Israel. The East African element of Africa is actually quite interesting. We have tremendous amount of agri-tech projects now between Israel and places like Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda. These are places where Israeli industry is going down there, working hand in hand with people, and revitalizing and using a tremendous amount of land for farming and other industry. In Rwanda, I had an opportunity to speak to people from Rwanda when they were here, and there's a company here in Israel called Energia Global. They work with Rwanda. They've worked with Rwanda and built one of the largest solar farms in that country, and it's very successful. It's 8% of the electric grid. And so these are things that are happening, both in a technical sense and a spiritual and a cultural sense to this emerging dynamic. I want to open the Hangout for some questions, and then we can bring out some more participants. Okay, any questions? Okay. I want to continue on and speak about, touch on another subject concerning part of the vision behind why this relationship between Israel and Africa is extremely important, and what this effect on the global global dynamic. The anytime you have, and you're going to have this with India as well. Israel's the overtures between the partnerships between Israel and India are very similar in the sense whenever you have former colonies such as Israel or India, or many of the colonies in Africa, and they begin to reach a point in their experience, in their national experience, where they actually can not be recipients of neocolonialist influence, but rather actually be the influencers themselves. It's a tremendous tectonic shift in how we view or how the world views itself. This rectification, so to speak, is paramount to repairing these injustices that have taken place. And the first step in that is one, not only a business relationship, but really understanding that both peoples, whether in this sense, many of the people in Africa and Israel share a common parallel or common point in history, like we were speaking about before. That recognition, that realization, drives a more natural alliance and partnership than any pure just business standpoint. What's been going on with Israel per se is that Israel is really built itself around this concept of westernization. What we're seeing now is the Western, really neo-colonial structure in the world, where they're taking advantage or have used their former colonies or former areas of control. They've almost used their. We have our guest here now. Welcome aboard.
Shalom.
Shalom. Good to have you. I wanted to. I was touching on a lot of the different relationships that Israel's actually building with Africa right now, whether that's agri-tech or alternative energy, and really a lot of this is built upon this sort of fraternal bond that's becoming the backdrop here. Whether it was between the way Kenya looks at it in terms of really that we're all former colonies of the British Empire, and we're kind of having this resurgence or this kind of awakening. all the way to the Igbo. I think you have these kind of different bonds driving these relationships forward. I wanted you to maybe touch on that a little bit and why that's what's really driving all this.
Absolutely. So, I mean, certainly it plays a major role when you think about the history. We talk about the fact that the British mandated Palestine and the various British colonies throughout Western and Eastern Africa and the entire African continent, and how this kind of put us in a very uncomfortable situation, to say the least, where you take various different ethnic groups, draw lines around them, and say you have to live with each other and create a government. And to exacerbate it even more, you take in the concepts of Pan-Arabism and Islamism. And so what we're seeing specifically right now in this point of history is governments like the Kenyan government and the Ugandan government and the Tanzanian government are rallying to the Israeli government and saying we need help in combating Islamic terrorism, right? And when you think about the story of the people of Israel and the story of Zionism, what makes it so attractive, or at least such a hot topic to people all over the world? To us, as we see it, it corrects a historical injustice, the historical injustice of the dispossession of the people of Israel from their homeland. And what came in after that? Various colonizers and imperialist movements. So whether or not you have a positive or a negative perspective on Zionism or the state of Israel often really depends on whether you benefited or you suffered from that historic injustice. So in the case, for example, where we talk about Biafra, people who are benefiting from the historic injustice of the creation of Nigeria by the British government are the Hausa Fulani, the Muslim populations of the north, which were put in a position of power over the Igbo and Yoruba populations of the middle of Nigeria and the south. And we're seeing the same thing in Eastern Africa. And this is why they're saying, how can we fight against this threat we have of radical Islam in Eastern Africa? We can go to our natural ally, Israel, who is struggling from the same exact thing, that is dealing with a scourge of radical Islamist terrorism, which is a byproduct of a prior history of Arab colonization, not only in the Middle East, but North and Eastern Africa.
Yeah, it's a very good overview. Just for people to understand, Yirmiyahu works with a lot of different. Really, is one of the I guess on the front lines of working with Africans in terms of through Herut. I think you're doing a lot of good stuff there in terms of kind of connecting a lot of this dialogue together. Can you touch on some of the? I think a lot of people don't really understand the fact that a lot of the Africans, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, really see themselves as an extension of not necessarily the Jewish people, but Israelites or Hebrews. Is that playing a strong part in all this?
Absolutely. There's a lot of interesting dynamics at play when we talk about the relationship between Israel and the African continent. That's aside from the fact that Israel is located on the African continent, as you so pointed out earlier. The people in general, right, whether they have Jewish ancestry or they're indigenous to the continent, they empathize and they relate to the story of the Jewish people, the story of a people who were autonomous, then were oppressed and dispersed, and now have returned to and are ascending back to their former glory. So everybody, if they are not a part of, like I said, the populations are benefiting from these historical injustices on the continent, resonate with the story of the Jewish people, right? As you pointed out, most of them are very religious Christians. And because of that, they feel that there's a religious aspect to it. But on an even deeper level than all of this, we have the fact, as recorded in Antiquities of the Jews, millions of Israelites were exiled onto the African continent. And many of them didn't just settle in Northern Africa, as we know, the different Maghrebi and Sephardic communities that we recognize today in the state of Israel, but also went into Sub-Saharan Africa and founded populations in Nigeria and in Mali and Zimbabwe and South Africa. And what we're seeing right now, as you've been pointing out, is the revival of these communities, a reconnecting to their roots. And one of the most fascinating aspects of it is if you look at the parallels in the Jewish experience of these different communities, it almost lines up perfectly with exactly what we're familiar with the history of Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jewry, right? Because we can all see while Jews were suffering in ghettos and in shtetls in Western and Eastern Europe, we know the same thing was happening to the Jews that were suffering in Arab countries with the dhimitude and the various pogroms that continuously happened under Islamic rule. But if you look at the history of, say, for example, the Lemba, they were at the same period as Jews were getting exiled from country to country throughout the European continent, were getting exiled from region to region throughout East and South Africa, right? For the same thing. They were used for their skills as and brought into the royal court, to just like there was court Jews being used among the different European kingdoms. Right? So if you look at these parallels in the Jewish experience, both in Africa and in Europe and in Asia, you see how these things line up. And they've been wanting to reach out and connect with us for a good amount of time now. Now we're just starting to see all these different people reconnecting, and that's what Chairut is trying to facilitate.
Can you tell us a little more specifics about what Chairut's doing, tactically to further this?
For sure. So, and for those who don't know, Chairut is a movement within the World Zionist Organization, and basically our message is very simple. We're about Jewish unity and Jewish liberation. Whether that unity and liberation is talking about the Israeli population itself, increasing knowledge of Jewish history and connections between our brothers and sisters here in the country, or strengthening our communities in Judea and Samaria. Well, we also deal a lot with our communities in diaspora. And one of the most ignored diaspora communities, whether it's because people know about it, they've been choosing to, or they just haven't, the knowledge hasn't been available, is the Jewish communities of Africa. And particularly, we're focused on educational programs, working together, learning from each other with Jewish communities in Uganda, in Nigeria, and in Kenya. And basically, whoever wants to be a part of the Jewish people and has been lacking the resources to do so, they can reach out to us and we can help facilitate.
Very cool. Very cool. Have you got any, I've noticed a lot, there's this, like Marcus Garvey's Pan-Africanism. It's really, I find it much more in terms of African Americans, but there is definitely this subtle sort of backdrop in Africa itself where, they're sort of, and understandably so, mistrusting of us in certain ways. And because of half of us are Ashkenazi, what they would call white Europeans, they associate ourselves with their former colonial oppressors. Do you see any of this? Is this a real serious issue in terms of pushback in Africa itself? I know African Americans tend to have a larger percentage of this going on, but do you have pushback in terms on the ground in Africa? And if so, how do we go about combating this?
Well, I think you pointed out something that's really vital in understanding this specific issue, and that is, this is mostly an African American and Afro-Caribbean phenomenon. Why? Because these different communities were in close vicinity to Jewish communities in America. So because of that, they have more of an understanding of that there are Jews and what that means to be connected or disconnected to Jews, as opposed to populations in Sub-Saharan Africa, which have been separated for thousands of years. And it's definitely an issue. But I see that it doesn't affect so much in the communities particularly that we're talking to in Nigeria, Uganda, and Kenya. In terms of Pan-Africanism and Marcus Garvey's philosophy, it's interesting that you point out the connection between Pan-Africanism and Marcus Garvey, and what we're talking about, say specifically with Biafra in Nigeria. The Biafran flag is based off of the Pan-Africanist flag created by Marcus Garvey. So certainly, while some of these disputes about how to deal with other populations in the African diaspora may not have bled over to the African continent, there is definitely a connection between the desire to unite the African people. And that's something that we're definitely seeing. But the issue when it comes to particularly African American or Afro-Caribbean anti-Semitism, and that specifically deals with the fact that many of them view us as being connected to Europeans, being connected to colonizers, is exactly what the British did in every single one of their colonies. In all of their subjects, they instituted the concept of divide and rule. So, for example, in the Caribbean, if they had a native Indian population and an African slave population, in order to make sure these populations didn't come together and to rise up against their oppressors, they would instill different xenophobic ideas among them to keep them apart. And we can see the same thing going on between Jews and Africans in the diaspora. In order to make sure that these populations didn't come together and realize who their true enemy was, who their true oppressor was, they continue to push forward these anti-Semitic and racist ideas among them. One of the most popular anti-Semitic diatribes, whether it's in the Anglo-European community or the African-American community, is the idea that Jews are running the media and the banks and all these things that we're all very familiar of. But who created these anti-Semitic conspiracies? It wasn't African Americans. They were Europeans, because Europeans used that to keep their populations with a scapegoat, which we're all familiar with the history of anti-Semitism in Europe.
For sure. That makes sense. I wanted to talk a little bit about Biafra. Why that? I feel that's a quintessential kind of example of how really a European and then really the British colonialism itself is really still affecting, not just affecting in terms of their former colonies being poor, but in many ways we're seeing this like really spill over into creating a situation on the ground which is really untenable. I mean, you have Biafra, which is really a culturally distinct, religiously distinct area inside Nigeria, and because the British forced it to join with the North and the West, they're now really in trouble because of the Hausa's adoption of radical Islam. Is there something is there something for activists to do about that situation? I know myself, I've been very connected to some of the leaders, both Biafran Exile and Biafra, and to me it seems there's been this sort of closed door policy by the Jewish world and Israel. Is there a way that you feel that we could pry that open to sort of bring out their plight into a more mainstream, broader perspective?
Yeah, I think the most effective way to do that and to bring attention to this issue is to remind people that when the Biafran civil war was happening and that we confirmed that there was a genocide being conducted on the Igbo people in Biafra, the Jewish world was in an uproar. Of the two non-Igbo that set themselves on fire and killed themselves during the war, well, they were both Jewish. One was a French Jew and one was an American Jew. So clearly, during the time when we saw Igbo people being starved to death by the Nigerian government because they were a distinct ethnic group which wanted self-determination, then it was enough for us to say, okay, we need to say something about this. And that's led not only in the diaspora, also in the state of Israel. As many people are aware, the state of Israel was very instrumental in giving arms and supplies to the Biafran army as they were fighting for their independence. So basically right now, as we're seeing President Buhari of Nigeria continue to allow Fulani herdsmen to go and kill Igbo indiscriminately, we need to start bringing attention to this again. The history repeats itself. Just as Europe was unable to just let the Jews live in Europe without killing them again and again and again, so too the Nigerian government, which was set up without consideration for tribal lines, is unable to allow the Igbo to live and to thrive and to prosper without persecuting them. This is what we're seeing today, and if we care about justice as we have to as Jews, this is something that we need to start bringing the world's attention to.
What do you see as? I have my viewpoints. I mean, to me, the Biafra issue for Israel is, to me, is similar to, aside from the fact that Biafrans self-identify Israelites, but as a geopolitical issue, is very similar to South Sudan. That Israel seems to me has no choice but to get involved if they're going to complete their strategy of basically ringing the Islamists in the north and buffering them. To me, independent Biafra would go along with a similar attitude that they had to South Sudan. But I'm wondering, in terms of, do you feel the Israeli government is aware of the situation down there, or do you feel that they're sort of in a bind because of other geopolitical influences?
I think certainly they're aware to at least a certain extent. The major problem that we often have in Israeli history, in terms of government policy, is short-sightedness. We have consistently had a policy of not having a policy. That we will deal with each situation as it comes, and then we'll use our Jewish intuition, our creativity to deal with the situation. And to our credit, it's mostly worked, right? But when it comes to foreign policy, it's very important, at least I'm of the opinion, it's very important to have a long-term goal. And as we're seeing an increased Western antagonism towards the Jewish state, and by Western antagonism, I don't mean Europeans. We always expect the Europeans to be antagonistic towards the Jewish state, but increased antagonism from America, right, our supposed greatest ally. We need to start looking to increase our connections to the countries that are closer to us. And one of the reasons why the Israeli government gave arms and training that enabled South Sudan to fight and eventually declare its independence was because we were looking for regional partners. And if we want to return Nigeria to being on the side of the good guys, then we need to pursue definitely the empowerment of the Igbo people. Because right now we're seeing the opposite. With Goodluck Jonathan leaving the presidency and Buhari coming into power, we can only anticipate that the relationship between Nigeria and Israel will worsen. If we want to change that, then we have to empower the Igbo. That is key.
It's definitely. Do you see any other areas in Africa where this kind of paradigm is taking place? To me, Nigeria stands out because, one, the Igbo are connected to us historically, and two, because it's in the news and it's happening. The only other, Kenya. It's kind of a flip side. The government in Kenya is very pro-Israel, and they have these issues spilling over from Somalia. So that would be a flip side of this kind of challenge. As you go further south, though, the Islamic issue becomes less and less important. In those countries that are kind of below that zone, I can think of the Lemba in Zimbabwe, and I can think of other areas as well. Do you see any other areas of cooperation or proto-Jewish communities kind of awakening?
To be honest, it seems that, for example, even the Lemba have an issue where a solid amount of their population was converted to Islam. So although the issue of Islamism, that is the militant Islam, becomes less relevant, a lot of different populations, particularly that feel connected to the Jewish people and the Jewish state, still are dealing with this issue. If not being confronted with the violence of militant Islamism, definitely dealing with the theological conflict that tends to pervade the region in general. Because often people view, because of the Arab colonialism of the region, Middle East and North Africa, view Islam and Judaism as being incompatible in terms of coexistence. But if the states that we view right now as being against the state of Israel are to ever be turned in our favor, then I see the best and most instrumental way we can do so as empowering those different Jewish tribes, or tribes that at least feel connected to Judaism. So, for example, Zimbabwe, the Lemba, or South Africa, the Lemba. And definitely we see that with the growing Jewish communities in Uganda and Kenya, but they're smaller, they're much smaller. Obviously the clearest example of this is Nigeria, in terms of a country that is going back and forth between being anti-Israel and pro-Israel, and that is based on the strength or the weakness of the Igbo.
I guess we're going to end our hangout soon. I want to just get your thoughts on where you see this as going. I see this as paramount to our redemptive struggle here in Israel, and really a rectification for lots of the past horrors that everybody in the African continent and us as an extension of the African continent has gone through. I mean, I feel that you see it the same way. Where do you see this going? What are the next steps of this movement?
Look, the purpose of the Jewish people, as I see it, and as most Jews are taught, is not just the redemption of ourselves from weakness to strength, from low places to high places. It's the redemption and the elevation of all of humanity and the whole world. So as we're seeing the revival of the Jewish people, the revival of our institutions, and of the Jewish spirit, the function of the state of Israel is not supposed to be exclusive to the Jewish people. We're supposed to take this blessing that we have and expand it to all of humanity. And Theodor Herzl, when he was writing Out Nuland, he was very clear in saying that after I have seen the redemption of my people, I have no shame in saying that I would like to assist in the redemption of the Africans. He saw two fundamental injustices that needed correcting in human history, and that was the oppression and the colonization of the Jewish people, and the oppression and the colonization of the African people. So if we want to bring up all of humanity, this seems to be the natural step for any God-fearing or not God-fearing Jew, whether you view yourself as a religious Zionist or a secular Zionist. Any Jew that is conscious of our purpose in humanity sees that this needs to be the way that we're heading. This is the way that we benefit not only ourselves, but the global human community.
Well, very nice. I'm going to end the hangout now. Anybody who's been viewing, thank you for jumping on. And we'll have more as time goes on. Thank you, Amiahu, for coming on.
All right, thank you for having me.
All right, brother. Take care.
You too.
All right.